for Bloom Energy, and I'm an advocate, energy justice and environmental justice person, but I'm not here representing Bloom. And I must start with a disclaimer that my involvement and the opinions expressed here today are solely my own and do not express the views or the opinions of my employer. And with that, I would like to thank everyone for coming in on the live stream to Just Transitions and Just Sustainabilities. Um, the focus of today's panel is going to be centered around the notion that many of us asserted that the COVID-19 pandemic highlighted weaknesses in our food, energy, clothing, and relief systems. What are these, and how can we best use lessons learned to work towards a just and equitable system that's less susceptible to shocks locally, nationally, and internationally? Panelists will include community leaders, business equity partners, practitioners, exploring what a just recovery and transition would look like if it were centered around care, dignity, relations, and interracial justice. Sophia Kiana is not on the panel. She has strep. Gary's having tech issues, but if he can get on, he will be on the big screen behind us. But either way, we have three amazing individuals who I'll introduce now. Ms. Alyssa Brown serves as Pacific Environment's Climate Campaign Manager for ports, leading their Ports for People's campaign to end port and ship pollution. She has contributed to renewable energy, climate, and sustainability policy for more than 10 years. Deep friend of mine and doing a lot of work in hydrogen, decarbonization, and like I was telling Mr. Lewis, incredibly well connected and knows everybody in California. So if you at home, anybody here works or wants to work in California, talk to Allison. We have Miss, please correct me, Sweta Chakraborty? Chakraborty, okay. I practiced that, I'm sorry. She is a climate behavioral scientist who is the U.S. president for We Don't Have Time, the world's largest social media and communications company for accelerating climate solutions. She's regularly interviewed on major international news outlets like CNN, the BBC, MSNBC, and is a partner of Pioneer Public Affairs, is on the steering committee of Global Commons Alliance. If you go to YouTube, just Google her name. Incredible panels. I watched a lot of them. I didn't know anything about the space, so I really appreciate all of your online archives, and I recommend everybody else does too. She's an independent director at Lightbridge Core, where she chairs her ESG committee and is on several advisory boards like New York Academy of Sciences and Climate Power. She is a book author, recommend it, from her time as a postdoc at Oxford University. And last, certainly not least, maybe the most fashionable one of all of us, Louis Perkins. He's the president of Apparel Impact Institute, an organization that identifies, funds, and scales proven environmental impact solutions in the apparel and footwear industry. Louis oversees the collaboration of brands and manufacturers on the forefront of the global effort to reach the industry's sustainability goals. And Louis was previously the president of Cradle to Cradle Product Innovation Institute, where he launched the Fashion Positive Institute for Circular Materials. So now that it's the three of us, again, I will repeat, fireside chat. Let's talk to each other. Let's be real. Feel free to ask each other questions as well and jump in. And let's get to it. So, Sweta, I want to kick off this panel with you. You are a climate behavioral scientist. And again, for me, I had no idea what that meant. Which means that you're incredibly smart, and there's a whole lot of work that you've done to really understand this. And I don't think many people have kind of run into people who study the things you do. So, we're having this panel at the very end of the first week of the world's largest and most important climate conference, where we've heard from presidents, community leaders, executives, and researchers about their best ideas to get us out of this mess called global warming. I was kind of hoping you could set the stage for us and how we got here. You talk about maybe how the fact that the risk landscape around us has evolved faster than our brains, really getting to the science of it, the chemical science of it, which has led to a lack of action. So explain to us what you researched and some of the implications, and talk to us about that.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, so I made up climate behavioral scientist. So you might not see that, or maybe I started a trend and you'll start to see that. But as of now, I think I'm the only one with that title, because behavioral science is the field, right? So Behavioral science is the study of why our brains play tricks on us, why there's such a gap between perceptions of risk and actual risk reality, so statistics, data, evidence around different risks, and why the brain either overreacts to some risk and underreacts to other risk. And we call that not being calibrated. Humans are perfectly irrational and perfectly bad at actually accurately assessing risk. We overreact to risks like organic foods, not eating organic foods. I'm sure everybody has a friend or is that friend that gets really upset that their apple isn't organic. And then we really underreact to risks like sea level rise and slow moving issues like droughts as well. And it's because our brains are wired like this, and it's been like that since the dawn of our species. We're wired to respond to risks that are really immediate and in our face, and this has worked out really well for our ancestors, right? So we are related to those that when they would see a snake or see a tiger, they would jumpstart the response system in their brains to respond and run away. And that's good, because we're related to them, right? We wouldn't be related to those who didn't react to the snake and to the tiger. We wouldn't be here today if those were the decisions of our ancestors. So in a way, it's really worked out for us. It's allowed us to set up societies and to make snap judgments and not have to think too long to do things like cross the street or catch a ball in the air. But it's not working for us today in this really complex, interconnected risk landscape that we live in now. And the risks are more invisible. We've got risks related to AI. We have risks related to infectious disease outbreaks, to the impacts of climate change. And our brain hasn't evolved. We still make snap judgments. And so because of that, the underreaction and the overreaction is rampant and it's predictable. So that's the study of behavioral science. Based on how we know our brains are wired, how can we think through how people are going to respond and react to risk? And now how do we solve it, right? Because that's the understanding of the landscape of behavioral science, but how do we solve it? So me as a behavioral scientist started my career applying behavioral science to actually looking at patient outcomes. But when I learned about climate change, I stopped what I was doing in healthcare and I moved the application of behavioral science to understanding climate, hence me calling myself a climate behavioral scientist. And the takeaways from this is there are effective communications tools to course correct, to close the erroneous beliefs, the misconceptions, the incorrect facts that are impacting people's perceptions of what's risky and what's not. And there's ways to create effective communications to correct for that and to close that gap between perception, underreaction, overreaction, and reality. So that's the field of behavioral science. And we have to do it because we really don't have time. We're really at a point where we've got this window to act now, and we can't wait for our brains to evolve. It's gonna be millennia before our brains actually catch up to the risk landscape we're in. So let's actually take advantage of this knowledge that we have of how our brains are wired, and let's apply it to better communication, better collaboration, and accelerating solutions that different stakeholders can get behind. The public, those that the public have elected in, and decision makers. We can actually communicate our way into solving this communications crisis. Sorry.
That's okay. And Allison, thank you so much. I know you are battling like chest and throat infection, so I appreciate it. But the next question is going to be for you. A Pacific Environment, amazing organization. Also, please check it out. You focus on working with communities to address a myriad of different issues impacting the hydrosphere, since we're at the cryosphere, hydrosphere, all part of it. How much has the focus on climate and environmental justice influenced your work? And what are some of the issues that you are most focused on, and how have the systems of oppression really exacerbated that issue?
Hello? Okay. Thanks. I think having come from a renewable energy space and really working on the ground with communities, making sure that they have access to renewable energy, kind of informed my career and really wanting to help ensure that people had access to this renewable energy transition to a sustainable future, a just transition. And a lot of the communities that have been most impacted by our addiction to fossil fuel have been these communities that are located in coastal communities, in port communities, and they're suffering not only from being near refineries, being from near fossil fuel communities, but they are also working these jobs and really suffering from all of the impacts of being addicted to a fossil fuel. And so it's really important that as we move in this transition that we ensure that there's equitable access for them for new jobs in the clean energy transition, that they have opportunities and they don't feel like they're going to be left behind as we transition to cleaner technologies, as we transition to clean energy. And a lot of that, there's a lot of fear in the clean energy transition that their jobs are going to be taken away. They're going to lose their job. They're going to lose their paycheck. And to ensure that there is opportunity for them not only to be included, but for them to be elevated in their lives and provide a more sustainable life for them moving forward. So that's always my focus in my work, to make sure I'm always thinking about the impact directly on the people, and they kind of drive me every day to make sure I'm getting where I need to go in what we're doing.
And what are some of the challenges? Like, working with communities is tough, right? I think, so I don't know how much you work with communities as a behavioral scientist, but I think, Lou, for sure, you definitely have a lot of experience. I have a lot of experience. It's tough, right? Like, city to city, community to community, while a lot of the issues are the same, and maybe some of the solutions look the same, how we get there, how we implement it, who we talk to implement it successfully and efficiently changes. And if you try to kind of copy and paste, you'll get a lot of the reaction and a lot of the acceptance that a lot of companies do, which is, you're so out of touch. This is not at all what we do here. This is not at all the right way to do it. How are you kind of dealing with that? I know you guys, California's a whole, from Southern California to Northern California, very, very different, a whole lot of stakeholders. 8th biggest economy in the world, if it was its own country.
6th biggest.
Oh, 6th biggest, excuse me, okay. The dollar's really high right now, right? Thank you, inflation. So, tell us a little bit off the cuff, what's working for you? How are you guys really finding success?
It's a great question. Coming from a policy background, I work with a lot of policymakers, I work with legislators, and it is really difficult to draw that connection between the people who are writing the laws and the people who are being affected by those laws. And finding a way to kind of build a bridge between those stakeholders is really critical, and that's a lot of the work that I do, is finding common ground, finding things that policymakers and the everyday person on the street can talk about together. Talk about like, how do I have a paycheck that provides for my family? How do I have a job that enables me to do the things that I want to do in my life and be home and be present for my family? Policymakers, they can understand the importance of that, no matter how disconnected they may be because of their advantages that they have in their positions. At the end of the day, they can understand the importance of needing to be able to provide for your family and being able to provide for yourself. And so I try at every conversation I have to just distill down to the most core of what we all want in life, which is to be able to live, provide for ourselves, get access to our basic needs, and then we can build up from there. So it's really about taking everything, all of the bullshit, and distilling down to the most basic elements of human life and what we all deserve to have access to in the world, and then building back up from there.
I think we can all relate, right? Like that is, everybody knows that's the answer, right? It's finding common ground. It's really being able to have them understand, but also you to listen. Everybody knows that. We've all been saying that, right? But I think it really matters because everybody's saying it, but it's not many people having success. I think that really highlights, it matters who's doing the work, who's really leading charge, who's communicating, in what order maybe you're communicating with the community, right? Yeah, please do.
Sorry, not to jump the queue, I'm sorry. But this was actually my primary research when I did my doctoral thesis on how, and everything you're doing is underpinned by science. We kind of intuitively know that that's how we should communicate and engage, but there is empirical evidence proving that that's actually what works. That common ground is increasing that shared value perception that somebody has, and it will influence the likelihood of what you're asking them to be that much higher. So you can actually predict about 50% of the variance. This is the most technical I'm going to get, I promise. 50% of the variance in human decision making is attributed to how much trust, shared values, and common ground a individual perceives in the individual that's communicating to them. So everything you're doing is very much supported by the science.
I love to hear that.
There you
My
go.
sister would be happy to hear that too. My sister's also a scientist.
There you go.
So love to
All right.
be supported by science.
Lou, I want to turn to you, and I have a very long question that I wrote out because it's a great chance to ask you this question. So, hundreds of thousands of migrants are employed throughout the garment and textile supply chains around the world. And the fashion industry is responsible for 10% of global annual emissions, more than all international flights and maritime shipping combined. And at this pace, the fashion industry's greenhouse gas emissions will surge by more than 50% by 2030. And every year, the fashion industry uses 23 billion cubic meters of water, with around 20% of wastewater worldwide coming from fabric dyeing and treatment. So we have an industry dependent on cheap and quick labor around the world with an enormous ecological footprint. Tell us about how you and your work at Apparel Impact is being used to fight climate change, and also really for climate justice for garment workers and the communities with the vision of aligning social and environmental solutions all along the supply chain.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Carlos. And thanks to my other panelists here. I'm excited to learn so much from you too, and I can see collaboration already in both areas. So we were launched, the Apparel Impact Institute is the organization that I lead, and we were launched 4 years ago by a group of brand retailers who recognized that while they were tracking shared data, while they were looking at transparency in the supply chain, understanding where their clothes were being made, because keep in mind that traditionally an order is placed with a brand retailer to a supplier or a conglomerate that kind of works to distribute those orders amongst suppliers, and then from there that supplier makes the choice of where they purchase their fabric. The fabric is then purchasing the yarn, and they make the decision, and the cotton or the raw material is purchased by the person with the making the yarn. So you have this disconnect in a supply chain or a value chain that's not vertically integrated. It's not wholly owned and operated in any way. And so you have all these independent suppliers that make up this huge global network of suppliers. And what happens is once an order is placed out, then it's distributed for pricing, quality, like timeline. Who can do this? Who can do it the cheapest? Or who can do it within, my parameters of what I'm looking for? And so within that, then certain suppliers emerge. You have preferred vendors that you might lean into, that you go to first, but ultimately, if hey, that purple sweater is really taking off and Christmas holiday is coming up in the West and we really want to take advantage of it, we're going to throw another order out there. You might find this really quick distribution of how can we get it quickly. And also keep in mind that we're also generally stockpiling a lot of inventory because you want to make those bets based on some intelligence and some data that tells you you need 1 million units. But as you start to see that sales are higher, maybe you need more. But most cases, you actually place that order and you sell under, and you know that a certain amount is going to be sold at discount once you go through the first 10 days or so. And so there's this whole sort of complicated, and this is not true for every brand or company. It's not true for every luxury has a different model, but generally speaking, that's a generalized approach of it. So what you then have is this system that traditionally can push down the quality of the price point along the way based on trying to get those orders fulfilled quickly and within a certain time frame. What happens as a result then is that disconnect has created all kinds of issues of lack of transparency around who's making our clothes, where the material inputs are coming, and what's in it, right? Like even what chemistry is in this dye, what raw material, what farm did it come from? Do we have forced migrant worker issues, or forced labor and migrant worker issues within this region that we're working at? So all that to be said is the work of AII, to get back to the original, was we were founded to help identify solutions that the industry could help scale. Most of them originally thinking about what do we know that's already scale ready? What are some of those technology solutions? Clean electricity, energy efficiency, what can we get out there immediately? And with the mission that we would, and you said it earlier, that we would identify these solutions, that we would fund them by aggregating the industry funding and sharing those costs, and then we would measure the impact of them, verified, and then we would scale that technology. Social and environmental has always been as both parts of the equation, but we've been heavily leaning into the environmental side, specifically around science-based targets for climate. And so the goal of this industry is to lower carbon in half by 2030. And in order to get there, there's a tremendous amount of scaling up technologies. Unfortunately, what can get lost if we operate with carbon tunnel vision is that we're not holistically solving for the issues that impact the workers, their communities, and the systems that are in place. So getting to the second part of your question, we were founded to really look holistic at all solutions. We've been narrowing in with the companies that we work in to launch this Fashion Climate Fund. It's a $250 million fund to crowd in $2 billion in debt and equity to scale solutions. It's important, and one of the reasons why I wanted to be on this panel and to meet you guys and really get into this conversation, it's going to be important that we don't isolate our funding and our investments into just solving for one problem in that country, because while we're bringing clean electricity or we're bringing new technologies in, clean electricity for the factories and the industrial parks that make our clothes, but not necessarily for the communities around them, because we have other issues like getting families off of coal-burning stoves and stabilized electricity for education and learning and empowerment to women, all these other issues. So what I'm looking at is how can other partners that are working in this space that already have missions around climate justice in the same communities where I'm bringing investment into the industrial park, partner with me in order to form a holistic strategy, holistic funding, and go in together for these issues. Because I may not initially be able to reroute my money into other directions that aren't part of the original raise and why we set this up, but what I can do is I can start to bring those pieces closer together with other partners and really look at this as holistic collaboration. And then ultimately, then I want to tell stories. This is how we went in with an organization that was working on the ground to ensure clean, available drinking water, safe, conditions around toxic chemicals, electricity availability in these communities, and how we leverage the power of the fashion industry and their dollars and their power to co-invest in carbon reduction to do these other things.
So Lou, I have so many questions for you, and I also want to do one thing. So my girlfriend, Kristen Daly, is starting a women's silk sleepwear company. It's called Everything Prior. She didn't know that I was going to shout her out, but I'm going to connect you with her. Yes, well, she's just starting out, so, but I'm going to connect you with her because I definitely want her to be focused on a lot of things you're talking about and see how she can incorporate it. And the silk is from Italy, so yeah. I think talking about all that, and I don't think she has. Totally. I don't think a lot of people think about that, right? And she's starting a business, so how are these big companies doing it? And before I get to your answer, I want to introduce. We have Gary. Finally, awesome. Hello, Gary. Can you hear us?
Right. Yes,
all right.
Yes, I'm here.
All right. I'm going to introduce you, but I want to get back to you because, I like fashion. We all buy a lot of clothes. We're all incredibly. I don't think, it's all obviously impacted to us, but I don't think we all really think about, like you said, all up and down the supply, all up and down the value chain, all the emissions, scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. We don't think about it, right? And I think the goal that you have, cutting 50% by 2030, when the rate is increasing by 50% by 2030, yeah, it's going to be complicated, right? But so I want to introduce Dr. Gary Cooper, a good friend of mine. Glad you can make it, Gary, again. So he's a co-founder and CEO of Reaply, a Chicago-based tech company that enables Fortune 500 companies, government agencies, cities, and universities to enter the circular economy through reuse. And as a result of his work, Dr. Cooper has received recognition on the Forbes Next 1000, Chicago's magazine, for the New 2022's LinkedIn Top Voices in Green Economy, Crane's 40 Under 40 list, and Dr. Cooper has also been recognized as a scholar at Google for Entrepreneurs, a 2021 Emerson Collective Dial Fellow, and one of the 100 most intriguing entrepreneurs in 2021 as determined by Goldman Sachs. He holds a PhD in neuroscience from Northwestern University, a certificate in management from Kellogg School of Management, and a BS and BA in mathematics and chemistry from Indiana University. So another doctor. We're incredibly fortunate, and I think we all bow down to all the work that you guys have had to do. So Gary, hello. I'm going to let Louis answer this question, and then I'm going to get to you. Sound good?
Sure.
All right. So Lou, back to the question. So, one, what companies are doing it right? I wear. And Gary, I think it's very timely that you come in, right? He does a lot of reuse. So when I think about all the clothes that I wear and how much I kind of cycle every season, every year, every 2 years, do I sell it? Do I recycle it? Do I give it, do I donate it? what companies are doing it right so that I can maybe target them? What is the best thing that we can do with our clothing to really make it, apart from wearing it until it's about to fall apart, so we don't buy it more? And what are the kind of challenges? Obviously, because this is consumer choice, right? And after we get to Gary, I want to go back to you because this is consumer choice is a big part of it, right? Labels matter, or maybe sometimes they don't. Price matters, right? Sometimes maybe it doesn't, but to what degree? So Lou, please.
Yeah, and I'm really glad you brought it back to the behavioral science piece, because I think there's something very interesting. The power of fashion is an art form like music, like theater, like art. And if we actually leverage this industry also in a way that communicates, I mean, whether you say you're into fashion or not, we all wear clothes. You might play a sport, you might practice yoga, you might like to go hiking. Like you're a consumer of these apparel, footwear, fashion products, whether you think you like it or you're fashionable or not, because we all clothe ourselves. And so as a part of that, to really look at the identity of why these products, what they are in our lives and what they communicate about us. And so let's get back to that behavioral science thing, because I think it's super interesting. And it's one of the reasons, if you're launching a new brand, if you're not solving a problem, then we don't need more brands. What we need to do is we need to encourage the current brands to solve the problems and to start transition their business models, both on the production side and the consumption models, which is getting at your question too around those consumption models of waste. And then I'd also say, well, how do you start a brand? How do you get a brand to change it? Sometimes you start a new brand to compete with them. I mean, one of the greatest things that's happened in many different products, from food to personal care, is disruptive small companies that come in and say, this is what it looks like to be organic. This is what it looks like to have no plastic waste in our packaging. This is what it looks, and usually it's not the big guys that start that. Usually it's the smaller brands. So when I talk to new people that are interested in launching a brand, I'm like, okay, but you have a big responsibility. You got to disrupt. If you're not a disruptor, then we don't need another brand. So there you go. So the behavioral thing is super interesting, because ultimately, I think as consumers, we have this this desire to acquire and purchase, and that's being fed by a lot of our culture, our social media. We didn't used to be that way, right? We have turned into that more, and so I think it's super interesting to look at what are those models that are going to get us out of that quick and instant purchase and move us into actually value-based driven around our fashion. And there's a huge part that looks at, let's retell the story around what it is to remake that piece of clothing, what it is to share it, to swap it, to rent it, to have a story behind it, to buy something and pay a little bit more, that actually becomes part of your story of why you love this product, because you bought in this place, you know who the factory owner is. When I flew over on the airline, I had this little kit that Delta Airlines made that was an artisan in Mexico. They used to have these great little Toomey bags, in the business class, which I got upgraded. I didn't spend, I know that's more carbon footprint. But the reality is, you start looking at these things, you open them up, it QR codes, it tells you who made it. This is the direction that flies.
I was telling somebody, and finish it, but on my LinkedIn, I posted the most popular panelist at COP, I think, is the flies. Yeah, in every single panel, every single.
They're in cahoots.
They're uninvited, but they're the most famous climate change panelists in the world. Gary, if you don't know this, there's a whole bunch of flies flying around at COP. Every single panelist has swatted 10.
Remember the Mike Pence fly?
Yeah, Gary, you look great, and you're not having to swat. So you're, but Lou, and one thing I also want to.
Like there are flies here.
One thing I want to talk about. Sorry, Lou, yeah, you finish, and then I want to follow up.
No, I think that I was getting at. I mean, you were asking what is the role of the behavior of the consumer, and then you finally said the other thing that I want to finally touch on is who's doing it well. Here's the thing. I work with companies that are doing the work. Whether it's big or small, they come in at various levels. We just launched this fund. It's a $10 commitment for them to come in and spend down over 8 years, and it's 7 now. And it's crowding it with others, so it's basically, maximizing the efficiency of those dollars to be also leveraging more debt and equity. So I'm like, they're doing good work, because they're investing in carbon reduction. Every company that's out there is doing a lot well and a lot not well. I would say they're not all doing a lot well, but I'll say a lot of them are, they know they're still burning coal in the grids, on site. Every brand, even the ones that you love that are the most sustainable in your mind, are producing with coal, because we can't get off it as fast as we need to. And so that's the big work right now, is that we have to disrupt some of these processes. We have to invest in transitioning these developing countries into clean technology and clean energy, so that's a big part of it. So I would say any publicly traded company, you can go on their website, you can go to their sustainability tag, you can link down and you can see what they're doing and start to learn about it. But they're also all part of the problem because they're all under the capitalist model that is growing quarter over quarter, shareholder value. We no longer really care about what you're making or what your service is if ultimately you're just returning a value to shareholders. And so ultimately, as long as we live under that model and not a more conscious capitalism model, I'm not anti-capitalism, I'm pro-capitalism, but it needs to be completely retooled in a way that actually accelerates consciousness and not the way we're currently under, which does not incentivize you to do anything differently than the way we're doing it today.
Well, there's have so many questions and follow-up points that I honestly can't remember because they're coming so fast. But I think a big chunk of it, and I think I also want to hear from Sweta too, is, and maybe I kind of speak for myself a little bit, and I am part of the problem too. When I think about reusing clothes, I kind of don't want to, right? And I think maybe we could talk a little bit about, and Gary, you're definitely going to want to talk about this as well, because the whole company, right, is getting companies to really get behind circular economy. Kind of don't want to. So for whatever reason, even though I just washed it and it's pretty much brand new, the fact that somebody has it, I don't want it. And consumer buy-in is the toughest part. When we talk about energy, right, a lot of people in a lot of places now, they pay their energy bill, and whatever mix is on the grid, that's what they get. Clean, dirty, it's up to the government or it's up to the local community, if it's a community choice, to decide the mix of the energy. But they don't have a choice. In America, we're starting to get that, right? New York, DC, where they are forced, the utilities, to tell the consumers, hey, you have a choice. 100% clean, and you can choose the prices. 50% clean or hydro or whatever. That kind of consumer choice, and you can talk about it after I ask the question to Gary, because so much leads to you, because it's really consumer and even just decision makers, right? The science behind it. How do we get there, right? How do we kind of break the mold of old thinking? And also, Lou, another question I want to get back to, remind me, we're growing, right? So the population is almost exponential, and it kind of should be. Are we, and you'll have the number, are we buying more clothes per capita per person as we go? Or are we just, is the industry of apparel just growing with the pace of population? But something to munch on, but I want to get to Gary. So Gary, please feel free again. And I said this in my previous panel, top LinkedIn voices, well-deserved. I always stalk his LinkedIn page, and I encourage everybody else to. Big supporter of Gary, always will be. And so, like I said, stalking your LinkedIn page as one does, and please feel free to add comments to anything we said. But,
Yeah.
I want to bring this kind of back to climate justice, right? And that's the kind of point of this, right? You write that quote, as a black neuroscientist from a small city in Ohio, a brighter and bigger future can be built by you if you have the support of the willing. So, please share with us your experiences with the interlinked crises of hunger, racism, poverty, sexism, and classism that we know too well in America. And how are you kind of using your past experiences to guide your work today?
Yes, and thank you for the time. And going to get to that question, cannot skip the whole conversation that was just being had about reuse. And I'll just say, on the corporate side, I think it's an issue of the how and the why. I do not think that it's easy, quite frankly, to reuse things in comparison to buying net new. It's so easy to buy things, whether as a consumer or as a business. Our system is really set up linearly to buy things. I mean, that is how our economy is based on consumption. And so the how isn't as easy as buying net new. And also the why isn't as strong, right? So we don't have overarching regulations in the United States setting for reuse. I know we're working towards those things with things like, EPR, EMR, but we don't. And then so you really have to go to corporate pledges or corporate commitments, and then you have to have employees who are willing to buy in. So all those whys might or might not be strong. So I don't think we have strong hows. I don't think we should have strong whys versus our current setup. Which is why you don't see a lot of adoption, I think, in the corporate world. On the point about climate justice and kind of my own story, as I write a lot, I am I was one of 400 people at Northwestern doing my PhD in neuroscience. And according to TechCrunch, I am of 0.12% of all venture money went to black folks. And so when I think about like the kind of bringing everything back and thinking about how do we use the move to a green transition to transition folks in left behind communities out of poverty into job creating, wealth creating sectors, I think there's no better place than in sustainability and in working in the fields of climate. And I think it would be a miss if the climate movement, the green movement as I call it, wasn't black and white and brown and yellow and all the colors that make up humanity, and not just a transition for the white and affluent in the countries that we reside in. So I've been super intentional in saying, you know, how I made my name for myself in the STEM fields cannot be the way that we allow minorities and women to be empowered in the sustainability and climate space. We have to be way more intentional. And so I'm happy to talk a little bit more about that. But I think that cures many other things, including black and brown people being, you know, mostly at risk when it comes to some of the climate realities. And then lastly, I'll just say is like being close to the problem allows you to be close to the solution. So if you're down on the south side of Chicago or on the west side of LA or any of these communities, you actually know what you actually need in these communities in order to survive the floods, the outages, the health disparities that you see by living close to landfills. And so I think it's also important that these people are us, all of us are involved in the total solutions that come into these communities. So if we're not the president or the CEO or the main person driving companies that solve these things, my goodness, we should at least be of the consumer groups or be a part of the design of those solutions. And so we at Replay have been very intentional about when we try to go make circular city, involving all the groups, not just the mayor's office, not just the Fortune 500 companies that tend to reside in cities, but you know the NAACP office in that city, the EPA office, and field offices in those cities, and then the community groups that no one knows about outside of those cities that have been serving people in those townships for a very very long time. So I think as we move towards hopefully, my lord, a greener, better future, that we take the time to be intentional about who are the leaders and who are the voices that are part of that transition. And I'm hopeful that that this transition will be better one than the last industrial revolution from a diversity kind of fullness perspective.
Very well said. And I mean, a lot to unpack there, right? And I think one thing that I hadn't thought about really until now, it's like it's a little right? And then next I want to go to Sweta and then Allison about this. But when you think about how impactful Black culture is in America and the impact that it has on the fashion industry and trends, we're kind of also, you guys can also lead the way on this, right? I mean, like when we think about, and maybe you already are, and maybe I don't know, but when you really think about what it is that Black culture, urban culture, hip hop culture does for the trends in America and around the world, and the kind of things that they can focus on and things that they can really prioritize, I think it continue to have a big impact. But then when you also say, hey, are we asking the people that are bearing the brunt and the burden of America to once again kind of lead the way in sustainability, use our clothing or whatnot? Is that what we're asking? Is that the best answer we kind of have? But it's what I've asked a lot of questions, and Doctor, I've asked you a lot of questions. I've been able to keep track of some of them, but throw some knowledge to us. Like, what are we talking about? Tell us, yeah.
Okay, so this is fascinating. A lot of things have come up. I'm going to try and connect some of these dots here. I wanted to first say that I am wearing a rented dress. I love Rent the Runway. This is not, I'm not getting paid by Rent the Runway for saying that, but there's other companies that do similar things. And I was really happy to be renting, only to find out that actually it's still very energy intensive. We're not actually saving that much carbon footprint by renting. So even with better options available for consumers, and consumers do want to do the right thing, right? But it's easy to ignore what they can't see. So once you are dropping your clothing in the at Goodwill, you don't actually you feel good about it, but then you don't actually know that it's going to the landfill anyway, right? And it's not actually being recycled in the way that you think you are. In the same way, it's nice to say that I'm renting my clothes, but ultimately the energy use of dry cleaning and distributing and shipping and doing it all over again 3 times a month or however many cycles of clothing people are renting, it's not necessarily a better outcome for individuals in terms of their carbon footprint. So what we need to do, and this is for experts that work in the space, companies like Lou and others that are really have deep insight into how this fashion world works, is to create better default options for consumers so it's easy for consumers to make the right choice. And that's behavioral science 101, right? Is for people to make the better choice, provide those sustainable products, create energy, ensure that the system in which you're renting is fulfilled through renewable energy sources, and then that will ultimately end in the final decision being aligned to, again, what we all want, which is moving that transition to clean energy, doing what's right by the planet, being part of the solution to the climate crisis. So that's one component of how behavioral science is part of all of this. The second one, and I hope I can tie in what Gary was saying, is we are influenced so much by those that we trust, right? That's what we were talking about earlier. So much of our decision making comes down to, are our friends doing this? Is Taylor Swift doing this? Is Oprah doing this? Is Barack Obama doing this? And it's not the same person for every segment of different demographics. The United States, for example, has a variety of cultures and histories, and there are different spokespeople for different segments of those different demographics that we can, it's really overwhelming to reach every single person, I understand that, but we can be very strategic about how and who we partner with. If we got Kim Kardashian to start producing sustainable clothing and really talking about it rather than doing the fast fashion that she's doing, now you're going to see that Kardashian effect of millions of young people not refusing to doing this new sustainable. Kim is wearing it 10 times, I'm going to wear it 10 times, something like that. I don't know what the answer is. I'm not in fashion, but broadly, but I cover fashion as a general communications, supporting solutions to all the different sectors, right? But that is a tactic that can be used in fashion. It can be used across every sector by identifying trusted spokespeople, aligning them to the messaging and to the science, and then the influence that they have on their audiences. And that's how we're going to start to see real widespread behavioral change. So for Black communities in America, really identifying those popular figures, having them talk about it, having them move their audiences, that's how we reach Black Americans. Same thing with Latino Americans. Same thing with any population at any place in the world. It's a bit tedious to do this, but it is so freaking effective. It is so effective. It's worth, actually investing the time. It's not expensive. None of this stuff is expensive, right? But it's just applying social science, applying behavioral science, applying communications science in a way that you know is going to result in more impactful outcomes and human behavioral change.
And again, you have a massive audience. You always, BBC, like you said, CNN. So if there was one person that could get Kim Kardashian's attention, doctor, I think it would be you. Yeah, okay. It was just what was on you for that one, okay? Because you said it was easy, maybe not for us. But Allison, I want to tie to you, okay? Because I always want to center community. I always want to center environmental justice. I always want to center, hey, we're talking about Kim, we're talking about fashion, we're talking about, but it's really the communities that have born the brand that should be at the right. Just transition should be at the forefront of reaping the benefits first. And we just heard, hey, one of the ways that we can really tie action, just transition, maybe action, right? Whether it's energy, whether it's fashion, is trust, right? One of the things that I say, and I've worked in, the environmental justice community space, the energy space, we move at the speed of trust. You have a system, a lot of different ones. Decades, you have lying, extractive economies, Exxon and BP, right? Decades ago, they knew about climate change, and millions of dollars later, they've sowed distrust in our media and our scientists, and now the work is so much harder that now we have to turn to Kim Kardashian to maybe make some change, right? Like that's where we're at. Same thing, like we're asking Kim Kardashian of all people to help us get there. Um, so kind of going back and at the same time zooming in, tell us, you work with communities, you've done it successfully, you know campaigns, you know how to mobilize, how to get to people's hearts. What is the right answer from people you trust? How do you get there? How do you get people to trust you? I know you said common ground, but what does that look like? So is it a bunch of meetings? Is it, I think we've all been there where, I now work for a big company. Sometimes they don't even return your emails anymore, right? Sometimes they don't want to accept your calls. Sometimes that meeting that was an hour, oh, I only have 30 minutes. How do you get people to trust you? How are the ways that you found success? And what are the ways that, maybe not specific to Pacific environment, that Sweta or that Lewis or anybody else can really rep people in Europe, right? That really maybe want to know how to get there, but just don't know how. How can they maybe make the most of their time and be the most successful reaching and galvanizing people to our causes, different as they might be?
Thank you. Whenever I go into a new role or a new campaign, it's difficult to build that trust with new people that I've never met before. And so the place that I always start is by listening. And I always go into a room, I say who I am, I say where I'm from, where I'm from, like where I'm from in the world. I say what I've done in my career, kind of establish who I am as a human, establish who I am as a professional, and then I sit down and I shut up and I listen. And I think it's really important that to build trust with someone, you have to understand where they're coming from. If you want to come in and you want to fix a problem in a community, you better understand that problem really well. You can't assume that you know what the struggles of a community are or what the community needs or wants, and you can't be the one to go in the room and tell them what they need or they want. So in my work at Pacific Environment, a lot of what we do is we're focused on stopping and ending pollution from cargo ships, these huge ships that are coming in and they're just spewing toxic fumes into the atmosphere.
And maybe bringing in the clothes that Lou's working on.
Bringing in the clothes that Lewis is working on. They're polluting these communities, and but these people are also working at these ports. This is where they're getting their paycheck. And so going and talking to them about how do we end pollution, first thing they hear is, are you going to take my job away? So you have to start and say, what is the future that you want for your community? Where do you want to see your community going? And I think really trying to figure out that core need of what people want in their life, in their world, and building up from there. And you just have to listen. I think that's what it comes down to at the end of the day, no matter what. You really just have to listen. People don't like being talked to. They don't like being talked at. They don't like being mansplained to. Like, none of us like it. So don't do it. Sit down, shut up, and listen, and go from there.
Allison, I consider you a friend, and we've talked about our past horrible work experiences, and I think Lou and I can only empathize, and Gary, you too, with all the stuff that women have to deal with. So I hear you, and you're seen, and we hear you. I think for me, what I want to do, and I want to go to Gary real quick, and then Lou, I want to go back to you because I've got always a million questions for you in the fashion industry. Gary, you have cultivated this personality and this brand of trust, right? You're a doctor, you're a scientist, right? You're a successful black man who came from a small town in Ohio, something that a lot of people can maybe resonate, or a lot of people aspire to. And the things that you say, people listen. And the things that you expound upon, people want to believe. So how do you do that? What's the, how do we become Gary Cooper? How do we become LinkedIn? How do we become entrepreneurial, most influential? How do we get, and maybe it starts from the community, but now as we're getting into institutions, we're talking about CNN, right? The breadth of our work and our views is getting bigger with social media. TikTok, I had Lisi Priya, who in our earlier panel, she's they call her India's Greta Thunberg, which I don't appreciate her. She's her own person. But this 11-year-old is maybe one of the most ambitious, and you, Gary, you were on the panel, outspoken and speaking truth to power individual that I've seen here, and she's 11 years old, and she has way bigger of a platform than I may, um, maybe deservedly so, probably. But Gary, you know, that's only possible because of social media, right? Like people in America maybe would have never seen her in India making all of her speeches and those causes. So how do we build that trust, Gary? You've been there, you've done that, you've built this amazing brand, growing. How do we be like Dr. Cooper?
Well, I appreciate the compliment, but I'm still learning myself. What I want to align myself wholly is to what Allison was just talking about. So I think, as I was saying in my first comments, I think you have to be very, very close to the problem and from the authentic voices of people facing it, and it will be a part of the solution. And really, just to listen. I came from 15 years of being in a neuroscience lab. I was never thinking about circular economy, never thinking about sustainability. So I come into this business listening and learning and thinking about how can we build technology solutions that actually solve problems that people are facing. But I think the ingredient that I've used and that I mandate at Reaply at my company, that I also see in the young activists, is another ingredient, which is passion. If you come and say, I'm here, this is my why, this is why I build, this is why I bring voice to this matter, this is why I get up in the morning, whatever the action is, but it isn't just a job. It is something that I'm passionate about, and I'm passionate about seeing through a solution. I think people resonate to that because a lot of the current movement can be commercial. Are these solutions to the point being made about rent the runway? And I know the founder of that very well. But are these solutions net more sustainable than not renting? That's a great question. Um, so really, I think we have to be great listeners to kind of earn people's trust in the solution building. But I think if we show equal parts passion, people resonate around our flag. As I said, my career has been up in neuroscience, and I have probably a bigger audience in sustainability and circular economy than I ever had as a neuroscientist. And that's just because I've just been really passionate about bringing circularity to the business world because it just makes sense in every single facet. And so I just try to lead with that same passion.
Gary, I think a lot of things to think about what you just said. I think one of the things that I really, in all of my work and all of the companies that I've worked for, and especially working in the environmental justice space, because so many companies, I think we can all correlate, a lot of companies, it's almost like a joke here where they're like, in the environmental groups, we have to deal with them for the siting or for the planning or workforce. Like, it's almost like very laborious, right? And maybe one of the things, and Allison, I 100% agree with you. You talked about, and Gary, you talked about it too, with trust and listening. And it's very timely that we're a COP where it's just all panels and listening. But how much of this is going to go into action, we'll find out. It's really maybe when we talk about the community working in, or the people that we're trying to impact, or the companies as well, right? What do they have to say, right? That's one thing that I think a lot of people miss. As a lot of these companies come in thinking, hey, I have the money, I have the PhDs, I have the master's degrees, I got the Ivy Leagues, I've got the connections to technology. This is good for your community, so take it or swallow it. And if you don't like it, I'm probably going to do it anyways. I'm going to work with the mayor, donate to his company or his campaign, excuse me, and get it on your throat and in your community, and like it or leave it. Maybe you won't like it. So that's distrust, right? Like, are you coming to the table in earnest? Have you? And that, I think that's a part of the dance, right, Gary? Building your brand, building your personal brand, your personal level of trust for everyone with you in the community, and how do you use it? Do you kind of be corrupted by the money and by the special interest and by the ease of just using that power, using that influence to do what you want to do what's best for the company? Or do we take the harder route and be a good corporate citizen and try to take the maybe longer, less profitable route? It's tough. But Lou, back to you. Talking about trust. I want to wrap this continue with this theme. We work with communities, we work with people, you work with corporations, and really trying to change their a lot of office material and supplies, right, Gary? Lou, but you're talking about all up and down the value chain, right? And we're talking about billions of dollars in industry where a mistake can maybe cost millions of dollars, right? Hundreds of millions of dollars. How do you get companies to trust you, right? We're talking maybe at a smaller level, maybe on a building to building level, and in some cases maybe multi-building level, but for you, we're talking about a value chain level, a supply chain level. We're talking about factory kind of massive implication level where they don't really, H&M doesn't really, I'm assuming, doesn't make changes on a 1 to 2 year time scale. They make their decision making on a 5, 10-year time scale, right? How have you built that trust to really have them say, hey, maybe we're going to do what Lou's talking about, and maybe it's a little less economical now, but in the long run, it's good for us.
I think trust gets built by staying in the game and listening and showing up continuously, and I think that's something that I've done. But I also have this real benefit that the team that runs our programs was created under the NRDC, the Natural Resource Defense Council, and many of the team, our team in Beijing, our leadership in Beijing, my leadership, Kurt Kipka, who's our Chief Impact Officer out of Minneapolis, had his career at Target for many years, then went to the Natural Resource Defense Council, was part of the Clean by Design program, and pretty early on, I saw that, hey, Kurt, you really ought to be the guy to build our programs. You've got real credibility. You've been inside these companies. You've played the role of sourcing. You've had a lead in sustainability. You've also been on a nonprofit side where you've built a science-based, data-driven program with measurable results. So I think for our organization, it's the credibility of the people that we have who really are there doing the work and have proven track record. And so what we're trying to sell into these companies in terms of helping them achieve their targets, which as of this week, I think I'm going to stop thinking about calling it targets, because Nigel Topping, the climate champion, said the other night when we were in a meeting with HSBC, and he was like, hey, this isn't a target we're trying to reach. This is a limitation we have to stay within. This is a planetary limitation. And we just have to because companies are really good at, we're going to make that sales target. We're going to make that carbon target. We're going to make that, And I'm like, let's all stop back and get out from underneath our corporate mantra, our NGO mantra, I'm Lewis, you're so-and-so. It's like, let's start to really think about what are we doing as a collective, right? And so I think it's that what you said about that common ground, going in and like, what is the question that they need to ask? What is their pain source? And I think a lot of times I really think through the lens of that sustainability officer who really believes in this work, but is also inside a company that makes it harder to do what they want to achieve. And like, how can what I'm doing help them achieve their personal goals inside that company? Like, I'm getting them more budget. I'm getting them more budget to actually have measurable impact in the supply chain. And I believe in these people as much too. And I think like really listening to them and what they're trying to achieve inside their companies and what they're trying to sell up to the C-suite and get approved. It's a lot about that. And then one of the things that Clean by Design program, which is now all our programs are based on this model, did so beautifully, and it started in China with the NRDC office, and now we're in Bangladesh, Pakistan, Vietnam, South Korea, India, Italy, and California, and Southern California, and soon to be lots of other places, probably North Africa, Turkey, Indonesia. But we go into these communities and we foster and facilitate conversations with the people that are there, and we ask them about like, what is it like to work on the assembly here? And we have ideas around energy efficiency, but is it like, tell us your story. How have you tried to apply efficiency metrics, or how have you tried to improve? Then they get in front of each other and they share, and there's pride, and they say, oh, at my factory we did these things and it was so great and we made money back because we lowered our energy bill, we lowered our water savings. And so this isn't to sell this program, this is like to really have a conversation about what we can do together, and they learn from each other. So we use on the ground people to be the best people to have this. Do we do it enough? No, we don't do enough. We make a lot of decisions in our ivory towers inside our big cities in the West, and we translate and trickle it down. And I think there's a lot more that I'd like to see our organization and our fund do locally in these countries to help facilitate these kind of conversations you're talking about, to say, what do you want for climate justice in your community? What are your pain source. I just rattled off. I think it's getting wood burning and gas burning and propane stoves out of your houses, but maybe that's not what you want to solve for. And let's not just let these be these SDGs that trickle down into what we think it is. And I think there's a lot of work to do. And like you said, like the garment worker should own a piece of this, and if they own a piece of what they're producing and actually had equity, like capital, yes, but also like human equity, like to be into the process of designing what your looks like, it'd be so different. And I think that's a big part of the work ahead too. And that, I hope, builds even more trust. And I hope by not just saying the words, but actually like showing the action that this is how we did it.
I think again, I wish companies would not look at this purely through an economic lens and really just say, hey, this is our one planet, right? And not only that, but when I think of the United States, right, and that's the lens that I'm kind of looking at this because where we live, record profits, right? Like just absolutely crazy profits. And apparently inflation, I remember watching a congresswoman talk about the majority of the costs for our inflation isn't because of supply and workforce, it's because of the profits and how much they've taken from it. And you better believe that they're the ones telling us that it's Joe Biden and it's the Green New Deal, stimmy checks and everything, right? Along with every other country. So,
but keep in mind, these companies and it all exists to serve us, the consumer, who's driving it. We are the consumers of oil. We are the consumers of petroleum products, of plastics, of fast fashion. We are it. We all are culpable. And so it is, I get it. It is easy to blame the corporations, but we buy into this system and we feed it.
It's a very dirty negative feedback loop, right? But as we know, people are influenced by people or corporations we trust, or maybe we don't trust, and we think that we trust, right? But the one thing I wanna go on before I kind of go to our final question, because it's late. We all have cocktails I think we want to get to. Rest our feet. Tomorrow's a day of rest. The last kind of question I want to get to is, you all are extremely successful and professionals in your own right. And the spaces you guys deal with, I think, not a lot of people get exposure to it. At least, as we've, all the panels you've been to are very eclectic, and I'm very happy that we have a very eclectic one as well. But I'm going to take advantage of the very eclectic panelists that I have here and ask this question. For those of us or people that aren't familiar with your work, and you guys are on the cutting edge, what's your favorite question? So, whether, in the industry, what is your favorite question that you want to answer? It may not be one that the industry's trying to answer. It may be one that maybe you thought of at night, on the bathroom, on the toilet, or at the beach, where you're like, this is something really interesting, kind of the similar thing that I just had about the culture kind of driving sustainability and maybe having Kim Kardashian be its spokesperson for it. It may be a question to answer this week, this year, in the next 2 years, or maybe just a question where you're like, that's an interesting question. I'm smart enough to really understand the question when I'm asking, or get to the answer of it. Or maybe it's one that you've heard somebody else ask, or maybe pose, or kind of dance around. But what's a question in your industry that you love historically or kind of newfoundly that you really want to get down to, that you think might have a lot of impact? And I want to do this. I want to start with Gary. I want to go with Lou. And the ladies. Always want the ladies to finish out the panel. So Gary, I want to go with you first.
Yes, I have many of those questions, and maybe I just spent too much time in the shower. But I have many of those because I think about all the time in our industry. Comment and question. Um, the comment is, we've just gone through a global pandemic where some of the things that we talked about today, we've exercised. We've understood how do we bring a solution, a vaccine, into communities and to get those people vaccinated. We've undergone those PR and marketing movements. We've undergone the collaboration that was needed to bring that solution to market. We've undergone all of that, the cost of it. So my comment is like, in question, how can we use the learnings that we had in COVID and apply that to climate? And I mean that very specifically on the implementation side. Because even if we get past the theory of circular economy, we get past the theory of all things, and talk about the actual solutions, how do we get people to adopt them to make it make sense? There were states in the United States that were offering burgers for vaccines, that were literally offering marijuana tax benefits for people to get vaccines. So if you think about millions of people dying from something that they could get vaccinated against, and you still had to use burgers to get those people to adopt that vaccination in some communities. My question is, how do we get broad system buy-in on something that's not as tangible for people, like greenhouse gas emissions or the wrecking of biodiversity or all the other problems? So that's one question that I always am thinking about is, how do we get people to care? And how do we get people to adopt the solutions with the speed that we need?
That's what I asked in my last panel, right? I said, COVID-19, how quickly did we mobilize the world, right? How quickly did we get everybody shut, restaurants down, nightclubs down, airports down, business shipping lanes down, and then to open it all back up, infrastructure vaccine. Imagine if we had that kind of attention on sustainable clothing, on neuroscience, and really understanding the science and communicating that well, on shipping and ports and understanding what are the things we can actually do to just solve this quickly, right? Yeah. So, Lou?
I think for me, it's back to, and I kind of said a little earlier, it's like, what is the pain source for that person that I'm working with, or how can I help solve a lot of goals to help solve for them? And to me, that's the bigger question oftentimes is, what is the legacy that you want to leave behind based on the work you're doing? Whether you're just like a sustainability manager inside a corporation trying to get some agendas moved up the ladder to try to check some KPIs off the list of your sustainability, or whether you're the person that's, writing the checks to get, to fund a lot of this work, or whether you're the bank that's trying, everybody's got a personal goal in here, and I think too often we're so put in boxes. But if we can help people kind of feel like, what does the future look like based on what you're doing, and how can you be a part of working towards that future? What is the legacy you want to create? And you can't always say that kind of languaging to people in corporate settings. They go, oh no, this is a real woo-woo question they're asking me. But I really think it's important to understand, where are we going? Where are we going, and how do we get there together? And it is that, if we can align our goals and help each other solve problems, it's not just about me and what I want, because it's so easy when you're passionate to go, this is my vision, I need everybody on board, and get really frustrated when they don't join you right away or they don't see what you're saying. It's really important to kind of try to align those visions. My legacy, let's see if we can hook those together.
And when you ask that, you get to know what they're about, right? What are their priorities? And whether you can influence or not, hopefully if they're honest and they're being truthful and they're speaking to truth, they will tell you, and maybe it's efficient how you get there to your vision or half of your vision or both. But yeah, ladies, who wants to go first? Maybe Allison, you want to go first? Doctor, okay, please go first.
So, as a scientist, I never thought I'd be leading a company. I was supposed to be in academia, and I learned really quickly that research and teaching was, as much respect as I have for it, was not my thing. So I think Gary and I actually had some similar career decisions along the way. And I went into science policy. And then from science policy, now I run a company. It's a company, not a not-for-profit. And the question I like to be asked, and I'm still looking for the best answer too, is how do you make making money good for the planet too? How do we actually make profit-driven behavior something that is aligned to a sustainable future for all? So it seems like impossible, and it seems like those two ethos can possibly cannot actually be thought of together. But in fact, the business I'm running does exactly that. We're showing how you can be profitable as a business and do right by the planet. That's the whole point of the We Don't Have Time platform. We support companies where they are in pivoting their sustainability operations within their company and across their value chain. And we're not trying to shame companies, right? We're not trying to, even oil and gas has a role to play in all of this. They have to have a seat in the table. We need to move away from what we were doing previously. It's not working anymore. This is a limitation of the planet. This is not a target, like you said. I love that, because we don't have a choice. This is not like a nice to have. This is a mandatory, necessary outcome that requires all private sector and everyone that wants to make a profit to change how they've been doing business, but we're not trying to take away profitability. We can still be very successful. So the platform that I run is looking to help companies pivot their operations and ultimately still win. Everybody wins in this situation. And look at the Inflation Reduction Act, right? So coming from science policy, we can create policies that support business actually moving towards this agenda that is the science agenda, and that ultimately will usher in a more breathable, equitable future. Imagine building something that we haven't even built yet, right? We can build in the middle of oceans. We know we have incredible human ingenuity. But imagine now having this as an opportunity to create a world where we can actually enjoy nature. We're going to actually respect nature and not exploit it. So it's actually an incredible opportunity where we continue to be profitable, we continue to make money, but we're actually now going to create a more equitable way of doing it, a more sustainable way of doing it that's going to benefit every actor, whether you're a public sector individual, whether you're the consumer, or whether you are in the private sector, really trying to help your shareholders out. So there's room for everyone in this, and I would love to continue to be able to answer that question. How do I still make money and do right by the planet?
And Doctor, as always, I agree pretty much with everything you said, but I want to make sure we put it in the context of just transition, right? We have a system that doesn't work, right? I think we all agree on that. Disparities are getting bigger, they're getting worse, the trends are not looking better, they're looking worse, and we're trying to understand that system so we can change it. And we're moving from a very different historical system where the majority of our energy is in the form of fuel, not in the form of electricity, the vast majority. So how are we going to make that transition in an equitable way? And that's the whole point of a just transition, right? How do we make this a just transition instead of just another transition where once again we have the same systems, once again we have the same dependencies, once again we have those black, brown, BIPOC communities that are dependent on those. Is it just going to be that we have those communities dependent on solar panel companies, or dependent on energy storage companies? The same system that we're working to build, have we not learned from are we not motivated enough to think of a better system, one more holistic with community ownership, one with participation, one where we're asking the workers to be a part of the solution and not just say, hey, this is going to happen to you, we think it's going to be better, take it or leave it, us white guys, us richer people are the ones who've thought of it, so you should accept it. I think we can demand better of ourselves, right? So Allison, final word to you.
Sure. So the question I get asked a lot, both in like a professional context and in panels, is what can I do to make a difference as the everyday person, someone who doesn't work in climate change, someone who doesn't work in the industry, in the biz of climate change. And I think, especially all the things we've talked about today have been very relevant to what I always say, which is the number one thing that you can do is reduce your demand on the planet. And that goes for every demand aspect. You can reduce your demand for electricity, turn off the lights when you leave the room. Reduce your demand on food, eat closer to home. You can reduce your demand on goods. You can wear clothes more than one time. I promise, Kim Kardashian, it won't kill you. Like, you can do it. And in addition to reducing your demand, increasing your consciousness of what you're consuming. So being aware of where the goods are coming from, how they're getting to you, how they're made, what they're made with, being really mindful about the goods that you're purchasing and making sure that you buy goods that are of quality that can be used for a long time. And all of that will contribute to this consumer behavior, which drives corporate change. If the consumer says, I want a good that comes close from home, that supports a local community, that, I want, if I'm going to consume meat, it comes from a farm that's nearby, it's not being shipped on a plane across the ocean to get to me. We need to be more conscious in the way that we're consuming everything that we consume: electricity, goods, food. And in addition to that, the most important thing any human being on earth can do for those of us who live in democratic nations is vote. It is the most important way that you can influence change in your community, and you can vote, you can participate in the electoral process to the extent possible, and if you're able, run for office. Even better, get more involved. We need younger, ambitious, more bold people in office who are actually influencing and making these laws, influencing our policy and changing the world, because at the end of the day, we need people who are going to change the system, and the only way we're going to do that is if we do it ourselves. So
But the question, Allison, what's the question? Your favorite question?
that's my question. That's my favorite question to be asked is, what can I do to make a difference? And those are the things that you can do to make a difference. And yeah, that's
Well,
That's it.
again, we've been here for an hour and a half. I don't know if it feels like it to you. It doesn't feel like it to me. I could literally do this for hours. But for those of you, obviously, online, you can't hear it. We're pretty much the only panel running right now. That's how late it is. And I want to say one for a couple things. I agree with you. More people to run. If any one of you ran for any office, I would vote for you. So know that at least to start, you've got one vote. But I want to thank you, and Gary. You're not even here. You've got into your Sunday suit on a Saturday. You're 8 hours behind. So I appreciate all your work and your participation. My panelists, I'm in awe of all the work you guys do. I'm super appreciative that you guys agreed to be on this panel, share your insights, connect. I think there's a lot of touch points that we can all work together on and kind of move together and make the space more intentional, move with precision and speed, because that's what is required, not only to meet 2030 goals, but to meet 2024 goals, 2050 goals, 2060 goals, and collaboration, right? Like, this is a jigsaw puzzle of a problem. There's not one company, one solution. That's the whole thing. It's a mix, and it's probably going to be a bunch of stuff, right? Like we were talking about. And how do we get there? Yeah. How do we get there? Trust, love, communication. Thank you, panelists. I appreciate it. I'll get off my soapbox. Gary, thank you so much. Have a great rest of your week, and thanks so much.
Thanks, Carlos.
Thank you, Carlos. Thanks, Simon.